Welcome to Health Club with Julia. I'm your host, health coach, and registered dietitian, Julia Campagna. I'm on a mission to bridge the gap between looking your best and living your life to the fullest. After years of over dieting, struggling with disordered eating, and destroying my social life, I finally found how to reach my dream physique without sacrificing the things I love. Now I'm sharing all my strategies and education with you. We'll be talking all things health, including hormones, metabolism, and lifestyle to help you cut out the confusion and start living. So get cozy and join the club. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Health Club with Julie podcast. As always, I am so happy you are here. Ooh, today's is so good. I feel like a lot of people overlook this aspect of your menstrual cycle, which is why I'm so excited to talk about it, because it's actually the star of the show, and a lot of people don't think about that being the star of the show. And I just feel like it doesn't get the recognition that it needs. And what I'm talking about is ovulation, by the way. Ovulation does not get the recognition that it needs because it is quite literally the star of the show. Everybody thinks that menstruation or bleeding is the star of your cycle. It's not. I'm here to tell you that's a lie. I know that people probably think that because it's physically what you can see and what you feel if you have PMS, makes up a lot of the cycle for a lot of people. Physically, mentally, emotionally, it's in your face. But the silent part, the ovulation, is the key piece here that we need to talk more about. I don't feel like a lot of people talk about ovulation. I feel like a lot of people talk about menstruation and bleeding, which is also important to know what's normal, what's not, what's going on in the body. I do understand that that's important. Again, that's the physical part of what we see in your menstrual cycle. But again, ovulation is really, really powerful and we need to talk about it. So I'm here to do just that. And ovulation is so powerful for so many reasons. It will always be awarded MVP. No matter who you are, your ovulation is your MVP. And it'll make sense why I'm talking like this and why I'm saying this as we go through it, because this is going to be a pretty detailed episode of what is going on with ovulation, problems with ovulation, what that could mean for you. So strap in, get ready. This one is a pretty loaded episode, and I'm really excited to bring you guys along with this episode because you're going to get so many valuable nuggets and information here and education from this one. So if that is what you're looking for, education in all things, then this is an episode for you. So let me start by saying ovulation is the thing responsible for getting your period. Without ovulation, we can't get it, and I'll explain that later. But ovulation is responsible for you getting your period. Again, that's partially why it is the start of the show, because we all think that menstruation and bleeding is, but you wouldn't even have that if you didn't ovulate. And it also is obviously the key to fertility and pregnancy and starting a family if that's what you're looking for. So these are just two reasons why it is such a powerhouse and such a big part of our menstrual cycle. So I want to dive into why it's important, different reasons why it's important. I mean, I just named those big two major pieces, but why is it important? Why do we need ovulation? Why is it the MVP? Why is it the star of the show? So ovulation is the driver for sufficient levels of estradiol, which is a form of estrogen, and progesterone. I'm just going right into this, I realized. I'm going right into the whole educational talk here. But ovulation is the driving force for sufficient levels of those two major hormones. I think when women think about hormones, if you know the basics of your hormones, the two that we think about as females is estrogen and progesterone. Those are the two right off the bat major players in our menstrual cycle. It is true. They are the most major hormones to us as females. Ovulation is the driver for your levels of estrogen and progesterone. Crazy, mind-blowing. Probably didn't even know that. In other words, to simplify this a little bit, ovulation is responsible for the shifts in estrogen and progesterone. So, and if you're watching this via YouTube, you can see this, but I'll put up a little picture of our menstrual cycle. You may have already seen this, but just to give you like the explanation, we see that estrogen is a major player more so in like follicular ovulatory phase, and progesterone is the major player in your luteal phase. But regardless, these two hormones have increases and decreases throughout your cycle. And so ovulation is responsible for those shifts, and I'll go into that and explain all of that and like what's actually going on in the body to cause these shifts and why ovulation is responsible for it. But just that is the key piece that you need to know. Ovulation is single-handed like the piece that causes shifts in our estrogen and progesterone. Again, mind blown. Like, to be honest, I mean, I work in this field, and so like I do know that, but before I really got invested in all of this and like started learning about this, I would have no idea that ovulation was responsible for that. I would just, think that, something's going on causing the estrogen to rise when it needs to and drop when it needs to. Same thing with progesterone, but didn't actually equate it to ovulation. Never would have thought that. So there you go. Little golden nugget for you there, and something new to learn if you did not know that. So why is this important? We think estrogen and progesterone, right? Those are the two major hormones, but what's actually going on? Estrogen and progesterone play a significant role in all of our bodily functions. Brain and cognitive function, estrogen and progesterone play a role. Sleep regulation, and progesterone also supports sleep quality. Bet you didn't know that. Bone density. This is why as females, and I guess as a species as a whole, as we age, your bone density gets like less and you're more at risk for like fractures and things like that. But for women, especially, you see this potentially more common and even like earlier on, because unlike men, we as females are born with all of our eggs, etc. So obviously we go through menopause. So as you go through menopause, you are at a much higher risk for like fractures, breaks, things like that, osteoporosis, because these hormones help to regulate our bone density and support our bone density. So this is also why it's research has shown that women who have like hysterectomies or anything like that early on, or like they're premenopausal, or just early signs of menopause, you're at greater risk because again, you don't have these hormones to support that. So it supports bone density, supports our heart health. Heart disease is linked to low estrogen. Again, but you didn't know that. Breast and uterine health. I feel like this one you could have guessed because again, those are major parts of our female anatomy. But progesterone protects from cancer, protects both uterine and breast cancer, so very important with that. It supports our vaginal health. Again, you probably could have guessed that, but estrogen supports vaginal microbiome diversity. So yes, if you didn't know, your vagina has different bacteria in it to support pH balance, etc. It is different than your gut microbiome. Vaginal microbiome is different than gut microbiome. They are two different players that work in sync with each other, but if you didn't know, yes, you have a totally different microbiome in your vagina, which is kind of really cool to think about, but estrogen supports that diversity, vaginal tissue, and lubrication. So again, if you have like low estrogen, you might feel like low libido or vaginal dryness, things like that, because it supports lubrication. And both estrogen and progesterone support your skin and hair health as well. So estrogen supports skin elasticity, it supports its thickness, its firmness, hydration, and both also control melanin production in the skin. So there you go. Those are some of the significant roles that it plays in the body. Again, I feel like surface level, a lot of us, because we don't know these things because you're not studying it, a lot of people just think that estrogen and progesterone are just related to your menstrual cycle. They just, they fluctuate throughout your menstrual cycle, they cause bleeding, end of story. But these are different things that those two hormones do. And again, ovulation is a really big part of supporting these levels of estrogen and progesterone in the body to support other bodily functions. So that's really cool. So this is why with my clients, with myself, ovulation must be tracked, which we'll talk about kind of how to do this and what that looks like, but it is the star of the show. It needs to be tracked if you're tracking your cycle, which everybody should be tracking their cycle so you know where you're at. But if you're not tracking ovulation, you're missing a really, really, really big part of your menstrual health and data and just like knowing about your cycle. So let's move forward from that. What can cause ovulation disruption? So obviously, I've said it multiple times already, and we're like 10 minutes into this podcast episode, but obviously ovulation is a really big key player in our reproductive health and just health of our body in general. Unfortunately, there's a lot of disruptions that can be caused towards our ovulation. So let's go through a couple of these just so that you know causes of ovulation disruption and how that might play a role in your life and what you can be looking out for or what to do. So we're going to start with hypothalamic and pituitary problems. So we have to first understand what these do. So the hypothalamus, this is a small region of your brain. It plays a crucial role in regulating functions and producing hormones that stimulate or inhibit the release of other hormones. So your hypothalamus is responsible for producing hormones that can either create or inhibit other hormones, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to repeat that so you guys understood that clearly. So obviously, major key player to all of our hormone functions and our hormone production. So how does this relate to ovulation? It releases a hormone, so again, the hypothalamus releases a hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH, in a pulsed fashion. So it sends out, if you think about pulses, boom, 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 boom. It sends out this hormone in a pulsed fashion. This GnRH is an instruction hormone. So it tells other things what to do. So it tells the pituitary to release follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, and luteinizing hormone, or LH. Those two, FSH and LH, are, again, really big key players right alongside estrogen and progesterone in your menstrual health. So, again, if we start from the top, the hypothalamus releases this GnRH. This GnRH then is instructing your body to release other hormones, FSH and LH, that are necessary and needed for your menstrual cycle. So it tells the pituitary to do this. The pituitary then sends these two instruction hormones, so LH and FSH, it gets a signal, release these hormones. Okay, it releases it and it sends it to the ovaries, where FSH instructs them to get the follicles ready for ovulation. Follicles are the things that house your eggs. I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but the follicles house your eggs and they mature over the course of your cycle until one is ready, and then that's when ovulation occurs, and that bursts and releases the egg. So your FSH that is released from the pituitary gets sent down to the ovaries, and it tells your ovaries, hey ovaries, knock on the ovary door. Get the follicles ready for ovulation. Okay. This is also where LH finishes the job by triggering the ovulation. So, pituitary sends out FSH, LH to the ovaries. FSH knocks on the door and says, get them ready for ovulation. And then when those follicles have matured and they're ready, then LH goes, okay, let's ovulate. And it triggers that ovulation to happen. LH is dominant in the late follicular phase, leading up to ovulation. It is produced by fast pulses of GnRH. So I already said, GnRH is released in a pulsed fashion, slow pulses and fast pulses. So LH helps with ovulation in a fast pulse formation from this GnRH, which leads to the surge of LH. So again, I'll put up a little picture for those watching on YouTube of this part of the cycle where LH surges. So it is quite low, and then all of a sudden it spikes up. This is that fast pulse from the GnRH saying, okay, we are ready to ovulate, let's ovulate. So it's triggering ovulation. LH is spiking to release that egg. That is it knocking on the ovary's door and saying, okay, we are ready to ovulate, let's ovulate now. Let's send this trigger to ovulate. So that was a lot. Hopefully that all makes sense. It's kind of a linear thing. Again, I'll put this up on, if you're watching on YouTube, kind of graphics to kind of go along. So if you're a visual learner, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But it starts in the brain and kind of goes downward towards the ovaries. So just think of it as a linear fashion. The signals start in the brain, and it literally sends hormones to travel down to the ovaries to signal other processes like ovulation and the maturing of the follicles, all that kind of stuff. So then ovulation happens. Ovulation then triggers the follicle to become the corpus luteum, which is actually another organ. It's crazy that every single month the female body creates an organ. Crazy. So ovulation happens. That process of ovulation triggers the follicle, the thing that housed the egg. Once the egg is released, there's no egg inside the follicle anymore. It shrivels, it becomes this corpus luteum. Again, I'll put the visual on the screen, which produces progesterone. So this is all just so wild. If you sit and think about how complex the female body is, or just bodies in general, but especially the female body, it's wild. You have this thing, houses an egg. Eventually the egg bursts out of that follicle. The follicle then shrivels, becomes an organ called the corpus luteum, and that process of becoming an organ and being a corpus luteum produces progesterone hormone. Wild. That is crazy. So, then you have this corpus luteum, it's creating this progesterone. A lot to take in. In a nutshell, if I can simplify this as best as I can, in a nutshell, the hypothalamus releases GnRH, which allows the pituitary to release FSH and LH, which gets sent to the ovaries to prepare for ovulation. And when ovulation occurs, progesterone is produced and the cycle continues. Wild. That's a very, I think I said that in a pretty good way. In a nutshell, that's kind of what happens. There's a lot more, obviously, in between steps that goes on, and a lot more to explain with all of that. But in a nutshell, that's what happens. And that cycle continues month after month after month. So long as you have a normal, regular, healthy cycle, it happens every month, every month, every month. Crazy. I just can't get over how wild the female body is. It's crazy. So, that brings us back to causes of ovulation disruption. I wanted to just go over that because the next thing that I want to talk about is hypothalamic disorders. But in order to understand all of that, you needed to understand the role that the hypothalamus and the pituitary play. So hopefully you got all that. You now understand the hypothalamus is very important. It's the first step in our menstrual cycle, really. So now, hypothalamic disorders. What can cause ovulation disruptions, ovulation problems? Hypothalamic disorders. So these are associated with the disruption of GnRH, which again, GnRH is released by the hypothalamus. This has a trickle-down effect. So problems with the disruption of GnRH then affects the FSH and LH, and therefore on the ovary's ability to ovulate. So if there's problems in the hypothalamus, it can't release GnRH. GnRH is responsible for releasing FSH and LH. That is responsible for ovulation. And if part one is disrupted, the rest of it can't happen. So what can kind of cause these problems with the hypothalamus and releasing the GnRH? So common causes of disruption here are chronic low calorie intake or eating disorders. If you are chronically in a diet for a long extended period of time and you are under eating and or you have a eating disorder, typically in the form of anorexia or orthorexia, eating disorders in general, but obviously those ones are coupled with chronic low intake of nutrients, this and calories, this can cause problems with the hypothalamus. So that's a major cause for hypothalamic disorders. Also secondary to that, not just the calorie intake, but also the lack of sufficient nutrients. Obviously nutrients are there for a reason. We need certain nutrients to perform different functions in the body. So if you have a lack of nutrients, if you're not getting enough nutrients in your diet, that can also cause disruptions of the hypothalamus. So those two kind of go hand in hand. Another common cause is excessive physiological stress. So a lot of perceived stress on the bodies, and this is chronic over time. again, stress, and I've said this like whenever I talk about stress in my podcast, I always put this in there because it's important to know that stress is necessary. We do have a stress response for a reason. Some stress is necessary, but when you have too much stress, when you're in this fight or flight state too often, which is a lot more common nowadays in the society that we live in this go, go, go pace that we live in, when you're chronically stressed and in this state, that can lead to problems. So that's what I'm talking about here when I say excessive physiological stress. And then another common cause is overexercising. That kind of goes along with stress because overexercising kind of equates to physical stress on the body. But again, this puts you at risk for really low body fat percentage, which body fat is necessary for certain functions, hormonal functions. So that, and then also the stress piece, both of those aspects, that can kind of cause some hypothalamic disruptions as well. Now, conditions, so that's causes of disruption. There's also conditions that are associated with abnormal secretion of this GnRH that cause just disruptions in the actual secretion of this. So PCOS is one, where you can see abnormal secretion of this GnRH that is necessary to start the menstrual cycle. Hypothalamic amenorrhea, again, that is a hypothalamic disorder. Hypothalamic amenorrhea basically meaning the loss of your period starting in the brain. Hypothalamic amenorrhea is when the brain signals cannot reach the ovaries to have a period. And explaining the hypothalamus and how that plays out in the body, you can kind of understand that better. Hypothalamic amenorrhea is a brain nerve signaling issue. And again, that is stemming from the hypothalamus not being able to excrete these hormones that are necessary to start a period. And then also hyperprolactemia, so elevated prolactin can cause some issues with the secretion of GnRH. So that is something that I like to get tested for clients who are either having fertility issues or looking to get pregnant. That's something that they should test. But that can also cause issues as well. So that's all hypothalamus related. Now I want to go into pituitary problems. So I kind of explained the pituitary and its role here with the menstrual cycle. So the pituitary is where that GnRH from the hypothalamus gets sent to the pituitary. The pituitary sends out FSH and LH. So that's, again, just recapping its role. So pituitary problems, the most common problem or cause of pituitary problems is hyperlactin. So again, I just kind of explained that, but hyperlactin inhibits the GnRH production, causing ovulation problems. So again, hyperlactin causes this issue with GnRH. If there's an issue with GnRH, it can't be sent to the pituitary to send out FSH and LH, which then can't get sent to the ovaries to ovulate. So again, it's all cyclical. It all goes hand in hand with each other. But this is one of the common causes of a pituitary problem. So symptoms that you might experience with this pituitary problem, like hyperlactin pituitary problem, is menstrual irregularities. If there's problems, again, with signaling, then there's going to be problems with different irregularities. So what I mean by that is irregular cycles, amenorrhea, and or aka the loss of your period. So no period at all, short luteal phases, lower libido, dyspareunia, never can say that, which is the fancy term for pain during or after intercourse. And also galacturia, which is milk production, so problem with milk production as well. So all of these can be symptoms of a pituitary problem. So if you're having any of those, not saying that pituitary problem is the issue for you, but definitely look into prolactin, getting that tested, because you may have a prolactin problem, which is causing a pituitary problem. So these are common symptoms that we see with that. So that's hypothalamic and pituitary problems. Now there's other problems that can cause ovulation disruptions as well. So things like adrenal problems, thyroid problems, going into a little bit of that. Thyroid supports your pituitary hormone production. It supports your ovarian function. So it supports the growth of ovarian follicles, which again, ovarian follicles are the sac that holds the egg. So the thyroid is supportive of the growth of those ovarian follicles and ovarian hormone production in general. It supports healthy levels of GnRH and SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin. So both interrupt ovulation if they're imbalanced, and the thyroid does help support those levels. So again, kind of reasons why that can cause other ovulation problems. And common causes of thyroid problems is symptoms can be heavy periods, long periods, short menstrual cycles, infrequent periods or spotting, short or scanty periods, amenorrhea or the loss of your period. So this one's a little bit difficult just because there's so many like conflicting symptoms. I feel like it can cause long periods. It could also cause you to not have a period at all, so like it kind of is conflicted. So again, this is one that is generally on a lot of labs just for general health, but definitely recommend getting your thyroid tested annually along with other annual labs just to check in and make sure that that is working properly. But other problems, again, primary ovarian insufficiency or POI, which is a premature menopause. That can cause ovulation problems. PCOS can cause problems with ovulation. Leading cause of ovulatory infertility actually. So PCOS, let me rephrase that because I just butchered that. PCOS is the leading cause of ovulatory infertility. It's a complex inflammatory endocrine disorder. So this impacts the hypothalamus and the pituitary. It impacts the thyroid, your adrenals, your ovaries. It does impact a lot, and a trait of PCOS is change in those GnRH pulsality. So the pulses that happen with GnRH, it can cause changes in that, and that becomes how it changes. It becomes more rapid and favors production of LH over FSH, but you need both in order to ovulate, because again, FSH is responsible for growing that follicle to mature that egg. And so if you're not having enough FSH, the egg is not going to mature, the follicle is not going to mature to a level necessary to ovulate. So that's kind of how that PCOS affects GnRH and then ovulation. It also can contribute to increased LH and changes in LH to FSH ratio, which I just kind of explained what that is. So yes, PCOS can cause ovulatory problems as well. But those are just some like more major problems that you see. So all of that, starting from the hypothalamus to pituitary problems, thyroid problems, adrenal problems, PCOS, POI, these are all things that can disrupt ovulation and problems that are going on inside the body that cause disruptions to ovulation. Now let's talk about anovulatory cycles for a second. So anovulatories is when you may skip a period completely, or you have breakthrough bleeding that may seem like a period. But anovulatory cycles means that you do not ovulate. You can have a scanty period, you can have a period or you can have bleeding that resembles a period, or you can skip a period completely. But these two things, whether you're skipping a period completely and or you have bleeding that is mimicking a period, are signs of anovulatory cycles where you're not ovulating. Bleeding here might be spotting, it might be light, heavy, or a very heavy flow. So again, it could mimic a period. This is because estrogen is no longer at a level to sustain the uterine lining. And so because of that, when it's not reaching peak, when it's not at a level that is necessary to keep that uterine lining building, and it's too low, that causes the shedding of the lining, so then you bleed. Hormonal IUDs, just talking about birth control here for a second, hormonal IUDs are not designed to suppress ovulation. Hormonal birth control pills are designed to suppress ovulation. That is why if you're working with someone or you're talking to somebody about periods on birth control, hormonal birth control, they will always say it's not an actual period, it is a withdrawal bleed. You are bleeding because of the medication, not because you are getting a period, because hormonal birth control suppresses ovulation. If you're not ovulating, you're not having a normal bleed. So that's what that's all about. So I just wanted to pop that in there really quick. But risks with an anovulatory cycle.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Health Club with Julia podcast. If you loved the episode, share the podcast and tag me, and subscribe so you don't miss any further episodes. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a DM. Thanks for being a part of the club. See you next time.